You think you know what courage looks like? Let me tell you about the day I lost everything to save everyone else. My name is Jimmy Colt. I'm 34 years old, and this is the story of how I went from being a respected quality control supervisor to being branded a corporate traitor, and why I'd do it all over again. Picture this. Phoenix Dynamics, one of the largest aerospace manufacturing companies in the Southwest. Gleaming facilities, cutting-edge technology, and contracts worth billions. I'd been there for 8 years, working my way up from a junior inspector to supervising a team of 12 quality assurance specialists. We were the last line of defense between faulty components and the passenger jets that carried millions of people across the skies. Then Marcus Kane arrived. Kane wasn't just any new executive. He was the board's golden boy, brought in specifically to slash costs and boost quarterly profits. 42 years old, Harvard MBA, and a resume filled with successful corporate restructuring projects. Translation: he was a professional job killer who made companies look profitable by cutting everything that mattered. The first red flag came during his introductory meeting with department heads. Kane stood at the front of our conference room in his $3,000 suit, clicking through PowerPoint slides filled with buzzwords like optimization and lean manufacturing. But it was one particular slide that made my blood run cold. Quality control represents 23% of our production overhead, he announced with a smile. Industry standards suggest we can achieve the same results with 60% fewer inspections. I raised my hand. Mr. Kane, those industry standards you're referencing, they're for automotive parts, not aerospace components. Federal regulations require— Mr. Colt, Kane interrupted, his smile never wavering. I appreciate your attention to detail, but regulations are minimums, not maximums. We need to think outside the box. Outside the box. In aerospace manufacturing, thinking outside the box gets people killed. Over the next 3 months, Kane systematically dismantled everything that kept Phoenix Dynamics safe. First came the efficiency improvements. Inspection times were cut in half. Then the resource optimization. My team was reduced from 12 specialists to 7. Finally, the process streamlining. Critical safety checks that had been mandatory for a decade suddenly became advisory. I documented everything. Every shortened inspection window. Every skipped procedure. Every time Kane overruled a safety concern. My computer files grew thick with incident reports, emails, and photographs of components that should never have passed inspection. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in September. Sarah Chen, one of my best inspectors, found a batch of turbine blades with microscopic stress fractures. These weren't cosmetic flaws. They were catastrophic failures waiting to happen. At 30,000 feet, those fractures would spread in seconds, potentially causing engine failure. I immediately flagged the entire batch for rejection and sent an urgent email to Kane's office. His response came back within an hour. Approved for shipment pending cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit analysis on components that could bring down a passenger jet. I walked straight to Kane's corner office, Sarah's inspection report in hand. Kane was on a conference call, gesturing animatedly while staring out his floor-to-ceiling windows. He held up one finger, indicating I should wait, then spent another 10 minutes discussing stock prices with someone in New York. "Jimmy," he finally said, hanging up and flashing that practiced smile. "What brings you by?" I placed the inspection report on his mahogany desk. "These turbine blades are defective. We can't ship them." Kane barely glanced at the report. "I saw your email. The engineering team reviewed the specs. They're within acceptable tolerances. Acceptable tolerances for what? I demanded. These fractures will propagate under thermal stress. You know what happens then? Jimmy, Jimmy, Jimmy. Kane leaned back in his leather chair. I understand you're passionate about your work, but we can't let perfectionism paralyze progress. The client needs these components by Friday, and we've already pushed delivery twice. The client needs components that won't fail, I shot back. This isn't perfectionism, it's basic safety. Kane's smile finally faded. Let me be very clear, Jimmy. Phoenix Dynamics has contracts worth $400 million riding on on-time delivery. These components have been approved by our engineering team, our legal department, and our insurance underwriters. Your job is quality control, not risk management. My job is making sure people don't die, I said. The silence stretched between us. Kane's expression had gone completely cold. Your job, he said slowly, is whatever I tell you it is. Ship the components, Jimmy. That's an order. I walked out of his office knowing I had a choice to make. Follow orders and potentially have blood on my hands, or take a stand that would likely end my career. That evening, I sat in my home office, staring at 8 years' worth of documentation. My wife Lisa found me there at midnight, still scrolling through files. You're going to fight this, aren't you? She said, not really asking. Lisa knew me better than anyone. She'd watched me obsess over work for years, bringing home stories about critical inspections and close calls. She understood that for me, this job had never been just about quality control. It was about protecting the strangers who trusted that the plane they boarded would actually make it to their destination. I have to, I said. If something happens? She nodded, then sat down beside me. What do you need? The next morning, I made copies of everything. Every email Kane had sent overriding safety concerns. Every inspection report that had been ignored. Every photograph of defective components that had been approved for shipment. Then I drove to the Federal Aviation Administration's field office in downtown Phoenix. Agent Rebecca Torres was a no-nonsense investigator who'd been with the FAA for 15 years. She listened without interruption as I laid out everything. The systematic dismantling of safety procedures, the pressure to approve defective components, and the specific case of the fractured turbine blades. These are serious allegations, Mr. Colt, Torres said, reviewing my documentation. But I have to ask, have you raised these concerns through internal channels first? I pulled out my phone and showed her Kane's response to my turbine blade report. Her expression darkened as she read. We'll need to conduct a formal investigation, she said. This could take months, and Phoenix Dynamics will likely fight every step of the way. Are you prepared for that? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Kane's name appeared on the screen. Don't answer it, Torres advised. If they know you're here, I answered anyway. Jimmy Colt. Jimmy, where are you? Kane's voice was tight with controlled anger. We had a 9 a.m. meeting to discuss the turbine blade shipment. I'm handling it, I said, looking directly at Torres. Good. I need those components loaded by noon. The client's aircraft is grounded until we deliver. After I hung up, Torres leaned forward. Mr. Colt, I need you to understand something. The moment we open this investigation, Phoenix Dynamics will know someone inside provided information. They'll figure out it was you pretty quickly. I know. You could lose your job. They might sue you for corporate sabotage. Your life is going to get very complicated. I thought about those turbine blades, probably being loaded onto a truck at that very moment. I thought about the passengers who would eventually fly with engines containing those fractured components. I thought about their families, their children, their futures hanging in the balance of a cost-benefit analysis. "Agent Torres," I said, "what happens if I don't do this and those blades fail?" She didn't answer, but we both knew. 2 hours later, Torres called Phoenix Dynamics to inform them of the investigation. By the time I returned to work that afternoon, Kane was waiting in my office with 2 security guards and a woman from Human Resources. "Jimmy," Kane said, his voice dripping with false concern, "we need to talk." The HR representative, a nervous woman named Patricia, whom I'd barely interacted with in 8 years, slid a folder across my desk. "Yup, Mr. Colt, it's come to our attention that you've been accessing and potentially misusing confidential company information," Kane said. "We're going to need your badge, your access cards, and any company property in your possession." I'd expected this, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. 8 years of my life, relationships with colleagues who'd become friends, projects I'd poured my heart into, all of it ending with a security escort to the parking lot. "This is retaliation," I said. Kane's mask slipped just slightly. "This is business, Jimmy. You chose to make it personal." As security walked me out, I caught sight of Sarah Chen at her inspection station. She looked up from her work, confusion and concern clear on her face. I gave her a small nod, a signal we'd discussed that morning. She would know what it meant. The next few weeks were brutal. Kane had been busy, apparently. Local industry contacts started calling, letting me know in carefully neutral tones that Phoenix Dynamics had been sharing concerns about my stability and reliability. Job interviews that had seemed promising suddenly went cold. My reputation in the tight-knit aerospace community was being systematically destroyed. But Kane had underestimated one thing: my former team's loyalty to safety over corporate politics. Sarah Chen reached out through encrypted messages, updating me on the ongoing situation. Kane had brought in temporary inspectors from outside contractors, people with no aviation experience who were approving everything that crossed their desks. Even worse, he'd implemented a new policy requiring all safety concerns to be approved by his office before any components could be rejected. "It's chaos, Jimmy," Sarah wrote. "Yesterday they approved hydraulic fittings with visible corrosion. I tried to object, and they threatened to fire me on the spot." The FAA investigation was moving slowly, too slowly. Agent Torres called weekly with updates, but federal bureaucracy wasn't built for speed. Meanwhile, defective components were flowing out of Phoenix Dynamics like water through a broken dam. Then came the call I'd been dreading. "Jimmy, it's Sarah. You need to turn on the news. Now." I fumbled for the remote, cycling through channels until I found it. Breaking news footage of a passenger jet, smoke pouring from its left engine, making an emergency landing in Denver. The reporter's voice was tense with controlled urgency. "Preliminary reports suggest catastrophic engine failure approximately 20 minutes into flight. The aircraft, carrying 187 passengers and crew, has landed safely, but investigators are already examining the possibility of manufacturing defects." My phone was buzzing with text messages. Sarah, other former colleagues, even Lisa, all asking the same question. Was this connected to Phoenix Dynamics? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. Agent Torres called the next morning. "Jimmy, we need to meet. The NTSB pulled the engine components from yesterday's incident. 3 turbine blades failed simultaneously due to stress fractures. The same fractures I'd flagged months earlier." The meeting took place in a secure federal building downtown. Torres introduced me to James Harrison, the lead NTSB investigator, and Maria Santos, a federal prosecutor. "Mr. Colt," Harrison said, "we've examined the failed components. The lot numbers match batches you flagged in your reports to the FAA. We need your testimony. Santos leaned forward. We're building a case for criminal negligence, possibly manslaughter, if we can prove willful endangerment. Your evidence is crucial, but you need to understand. Phoenix Dynamics has hired Blackstone Legal. They're going to come after you with everything they have. Blackstone Legal, the most aggressive corporate defense firm in the country. They'd destroyed whistleblowers before, turning victims into villains through carefully orchestrated media campaigns and legal warfare. What happened to the passengers? I asked. Miraculously, no fatalities, Harrison replied. The pilots managed an emergency landing with one engine. But if those blades had failed at cruising altitude over the Rockies, he didn't need to finish. We all knew how that story would have ended. The next few months were a nightmare of depositions, legal threats, and character assassination. Kane hired a private investigation firm that dug into every aspect of my life, looking for anything they could use to discredit me. They leaked selective information to trade publications, painting me as a disgruntled employee with a history of overreaching safety concerns. The stress nearly destroyed my marriage. Lisa found herself fielding calls from reporters and dodging process servers. Our savings drained as legal bills mounted. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I'd made the right choice, if destroying my own life had really been worth it. Then Sarah Chen called with news that changed everything. "Jimmy, you need to see this," she said, excitement barely contained in her voice. Kane made a mistake, a big one. She'd managed to access Kane's email server during a routine system update. What she found was a smoking gun, an email thread between Kane and Phoenix Dynamics insurance carrier, discussing the acceptable risk profile of shipping components with known defects. In black and white, Kane had calculated that the cost of potential lawsuits was less than the cost of proper quality control. He'd literally put a price on human lives. "We need to get this to Torres immediately," I said. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Kane's been keeping 2 sets of inspection records, the official ones that go to clients, and the real ones that show all the defects we've been finding. He's got everything documented, Jimmy. Every shortcut, every ignored safety concern, every component that should have been rejected." Santos nearly smiled when Torres showed her the new evidence. "This changes everything," she said. "With this documentation, we can prove intent. Kane wasn't just cutting corners. He was deliberately endangering lives for profit." The trial became a media sensation. Phoenix Dynamics, one of the region's largest employers, being prosecuted for criminal negligence. Kane, the Golden Boy executive, facing potential prison time. And at the center of it all, the whistleblower who'd risked everything to expose the truth. Testifying was surreal. I sat in that federal courtroom, facing Kane across a room filled with reporters, lawyers, and Phoenix Dynamics employees who'd once been my colleagues. Kane's defense team tried everything, attacking my credibility, my motives, even my mental stability. They painted me as an obsessive employee who'd fabricated evidence out of spite. But the evidence spoke louder than their rhetoric. The failed turbine blades, the forged inspection records, the calculated risk assessments that valued profit over safety. Email after email showing Kane's systematic dismantling of quality controls. The turning point came when the prosecution played a recorded phone call between Kane and Phoenix Dynamics CEO discussing my termination. Kane's voice was crystal clear. "Colt's becoming a problem. He's asking too many questions about components we need to ship. I recommend we eliminate the obstacle." Eliminate the obstacle. That's what I'd become to Marcus Kane. Not a safety professional doing his job, but an obstacle to profit. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Kane's confident mask had finally cracked completely. He sat rigid in his chair, knuckles white as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Kane was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution. Phoenix Dynamics faced $47 million in fines and was placed under federal monitoring for 5 years. Most importantly, they were required to implement new safety protocols and hire an independent quality assurance firm. But for me, the real victory came 6 months later. I was working as a safety consultant, helping other aerospace companies implement proper quality controls, when Sarah called with an update from Phoenix Dynamics. "You should see this place now, Jimmy," she said. "They've hired 20 new inspectors. Every component gets triple-checked. The new management actually listens when we raise safety concerns." And Kane's replacement? Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, different person, but she's got 30 years in aerospace engineering. First thing she did was hold a company-wide meeting about safety culture. She actually quoted you. That hit me harder than I'd expected. What did she say? That quality control isn't about slowing down production. It's about making sure everyone gets home safely. As I hung up, I thought about the passengers on that Denver flight. They'd never know how close they'd come to catastrophe, or that their survival had depended on the failure of components that should never have left the factory. But they were alive, and their families were intact. And that had to be enough. I keep that letter in my desk drawer, right next to a photo from my Phoenix Dynamics days. My quality control team celebrating after we'd identified a critical defect in fighter jet components. Everyone's smiling, proud of work that mattered. The aerospace industry is small, and word travels fast. My reputation, damaged by Kane's smear campaign, was slowly rebuilding. Companies began reaching out, looking for someone who understood that safety wasn't just a regulatory requirement. It was a moral obligation. Lisa and I are rebuilding too. The stress tested our marriage in ways I wouldn't wish on anyone, but we came through stronger. She jokes that she married a quality control supervisor and ended up with a professional troublemaker. She's not wrong. Last month, I received a letter from Captain Jennifer Walsh, the pilot who'd managed that emergency landing in Denver. She'd tracked down my contact information through the NTSB investigation files. "Mr. Colt," she wrote, "I don't know if anyone's told you this, but you saved 187 lives. Not just the passengers on my flight, but everyone who would have flown with Phoenix Dynamics components if you hadn't spoken up. Thank you for having the courage to do what was right." I keep that letter in my desk drawer, right next to a photo from my Phoenix Dynamics days. My quality control team celebrating after we'd identified a critical defect in fighter jet components. Everyone's smiling, proud of work that mattered. That's the thing about being a whistleblower. People focus on the dramatic moments, the confrontations, the legal battles, the media attention. But the real story isn't about courage in crisis moments. It's about the daily choice to prioritize what's right over what's convenient. Marcus Kane made his choices based on spreadsheets and profit margins. I made mine based on the faces of people I'd never meet. Passengers who trusted that the plane they boarded was safe to fly. Kane's in federal prison now, and Phoenix Dynamics is building safer aircraft. The system worked, eventually, but it took someone willing to risk everything to make it work. Would I do it again? Every single time. Because some things are worth more than a career, more than financial security, more than the approval of colleagues who care more about quarterly reports than human lives. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. But living with yourself afterward? That's priceless. The next time you board an aircraft, remember that your safety depends on hundreds of people you'll never meet. Inspectors, engineers, quality control specialists who check every component twice. Most of them will never face a moment like I did, but they show up every day committed to one simple principle. Everyone deserves to make it home safely. That's not heroism. That's just doing the job right. And sometimes that's the most important thing in the world.